This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook, and I'm here with my colleague Beck Guild. We're at the 8th BioCeuticals Research Symposium, and it's weekend 2. We've just heard Amanda Archibald. Beck, how's your head?
Yeah, actually pretty good. Today's session was not too heavy on the biochemistry.
Yeah.
It was just more. It was sort of just like setting a landscape for us to understand how many. Let's start with the title of today's session for Amanda was The Influence of 21st Century Living on Environment, Genes, Diet, and Human Function. So bearing in mind that that's the overall theme, basically today, she just channeled her inner analyst and gave us a global look at everything that is impacting our well-being that's probably outside of our biochemistry. So yeah, she basically used the blue zones. So for those who aren't familiar with the blue zones, that's a book that was written, I forget the author, forgive me, about centenarians and like having a look at
I'm just going to reach over and get it. I've lent it to somebody.
It's not there. Yeah, so but it looks at sort of what makes these nations that have this high amount of centenarians, long-living people, what are the aspects that are underpinning why they're living so long? And so one of the key things about that is that there are social connections and sometimes a faith-based system of society.
Very often, actually.
Yeah.
Or meditation, which was an interesting point.
Yeah. So
you don't have to believe in God.
No, but that you using it kind of like a centralized thing to come back to a state of like mindfulness or being. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, one of the big things that I pull out of the blue zones is a sense of purpose and respect for those that have gone before us. So, you know, we like the living, the elderly, but also the ancestral stuff. Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing, to give homage to our ancestors, those that have made us who we are. So whether it be your mum and your dad, or whether it be your grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, grandpa, which some of us are lucky to have, I wasn't. Really interesting how you get, and as long as they're included in your family, in making who you are. I think that's the interesting thing. But you know, one of the things I pulled out and I sort of had many questions about it was that like the Scandinavian countries have very longevity, but indeed the Netherlands has got high stress. So it's kind of like, you know, there's still some questions, some unanswered questions. What is it? And one of the things that I think is overarching is movement, not exercise, movement. Yeah. So, and you can't pull this, you can't cherry pick anything. I don't think either. But there was just some really interesting things about happiness.
Yes.
That pulled out.
Yes.
That was pulled out of the framework with the blue zones.
Yeah, so she was looking at a couple of key categories as she was running through all of these kind of like health statistics. So happiness was an interesting one. Like how happy are our society and how does that influence our DNA and our longevity? Yes. Stress, work, financial pressures and burdens and how that relates back to happiness and well-being. And there were some really interesting sections actually on the impact of sleep and, you know, the direct
DNA.
Direct relationship with an improvement or unimprovement in DNA, which sleep is such a fascinating area. I think it's such an underutilized intervention, shall we say. But I remember listening to, I can't even remember who it was, but talking about how it's sort of so important for resetting and creating a baseline for your nervous system, which then allows other parts of the body, the endocrine system, the immune system, and everything to kind of come into play. So I must admit, in the last few years, I've really started to pay attention to how important sleep is for everyone.
Yeah.
Self-included.
And indeed naps if you can.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was a really interesting thing. Again, blue zones. But you know, one of the things that I questioned as well was the data looking at the financial burden of stress versus things like suicide and depression and all that sort of thing. And it does appear that money does buy happiness to some extent.
Or access to more happiness, perhaps.
And whether that's got to do with access to healthcare, I mean, we're talking about a global scale, so it's really hard to extrapolate from the Australian situation where we can get mental health care plans and 6 free visits or virtually free visits to a psychologist, and you can do that twice a year, I think, to somewhere, try and extrapolate to somewhere like Mexico or Ecuador, where they just don't have that sort of framework. So it's really hard to extrapolate. But one of the interesting things that I pulled out again as well, was the point about coping with stress and how females have so much more stress than males. We know this. Females have to look after the males, and the males don't cope with the stress, so put more of that stress back onto the females. I mean, in COVID-19, in the shutdown in Australia, there's been this explosion of domestic violence. And that says something about resilience, which Carrie Jones is going to talk about on the last weekend.
Yes.
And, my wife runs across this with children. They'll come up to her with a pencil and say, I broke my pencil. But they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to solve it.
Yeah.
They just have a broken pencil. And Lee looks at them and says, yes, you have. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And they go, sharpen it?
How many years have you been married now? She's had lots of practice.
She's had lots of practice looking after a 54-year-old child. Thanks so much for that one, Beck.
Because I mean it from a place of love.
but it's getting serious. It's a really interesting point about are we failing the younger generations with resilience, and indeed how to interact with other human beings, how to say hello. We know this. Just go to any uni and watch people.
Yeah.
My sons have come across this. My eldest son particularly, who's quite confident, he goes, "G'day, how you going?" And they go, "Hi."
Yeah, it's true.
They don't know how to interact.
That was another aspect, though, that Amanda looked at.
How to say hello. Sorry, Beck, I cut you off.
That's all right. No, I was just going to say that's another aspect, though, I think that Amanda did look at this a little bit in the presentation, but the impact of devices, smart devices, and and interestingly, e-commerce. So, shopping online, and you forget that going shopping, you have to interact with people. Like, I think probably since we've all kind of tried to be staying at home and things, I've seen a lot of people talking about how going back out and doing simple things, simple tasks like shopping, and there's crowds around, like suddenly people are a little bit affected by that, on an anxious level. And so I think we forget that we're such social people, but as soon as you separate from that, that has some very core changes that it can do from a cellular level, not just behavioral, but cellular. Yeah.
But I wonder also if in a practical way, that commerce has actually created a rod for its own back, because you're getting the workers under so much more pressures with quota and fulfilling a sale, even in dress shops. And yes, I am the shopper in my family, and I do go dress shopping with Lee. Yes, for her.
I think Lee joins you under sufferance. I think there's one of you enjoys the shopping a little bit more than the other.
But we have fun. Like I interact and we play. Like we have fun with the shop assistants, and But I do wonder if the pressure selling has actually created a rod for its own back, because they're the ones where people avoid because they feel pressured. So they go to e-commerce. Nah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
it was interesting how Amanda brought this back to even nutrients. You know, B6, zinc, magnesium, wasting. The cortisol response wastes these nutrients.
yes.
And so you can bring all of that esoteric type concepts and bring it back to a nutritional level.
Yes, which
indeed she spoke about that in her workshop.
She did. She talked about nutrition versus nurture at the end of her plenary, and it sort of was talking about all of these things that she was looking at in, like, you know, on a global scale, and then she brought it all back to, and this is what it can kind of mean at a nutritional biochemistry level. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting talking about the neurotransmitters as well. And I'm really interested. I would so love to see some data that looks at the neurotransmitter metabolites, how we measure them in the urine, and maybe see if there was any concordance with SNPs or indeed nutrition. It'd just be really interesting to tie this in, because we know that orthodox medicine at the moment, at least, is very skeptical of these urinary transmitter metabolites. But indeed, 10, 15 years ago, orthodox medicine berated the urinary metabolites of bone. And yet now they're used quite openly to measure the impact of osteoporosis. So I just think it's time, and it's another instance where nutritional medicine practitioners, integrative medicine practitioners are way ahead of the ball game. Medicine is going to have to catch up, sorry.
Yeah, but it also comes down to what you're using every day in practice as well. Like, I think nutritional medicine, integrative medicine are looking at these biochemistry pathways every single day. And so, you know, you use it or you lose it. It's like a second language, isn't it? You know, if you're not speaking that language, suddenly you've got gaps in that knowledge. And so it's not to say that medicine is necessarily behind. It's just that they take a totally different approach. They're reactive, typically, orthodox medicine, reactive to what's happening rather than proactive, which is where we're typically focused in functional medicine circles. And, you know, looking at some of these data points, I suppose, that Amanda has, you know, brought to the front, is these are the forgotten elements of people's health and well-being. These are the everyday aspects to what makes us feel like we've had a great day or a bad day, or what makes us feel like we're a success or a failure, or what makes us feel like we're going on the right path or the wrong path, you know. And so what I loved is that she's brought all this stuff into a focus, because they are these forgotten things. It's like when we started learning about things like mold and biotoxin illness, it's the unseen element that could actually be underpinning somebody's health issue. And so, you know, unless we're starting to talk about these things and they're part of the discussion and they're part of our patient intake, and part of our questionnaires, or just our general discussions in the clinical environment, you know, we're not really going to see how much of an impact that they're having at an everyday level. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I loved about how Amanda's mind works, I mean, she's a data analyst, and that's her history. And I love the way that she puts things in, what was she calling it? The buckets?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So all of the SNPs, all of the things, all of the SNPs that we get so, we drill, in my mind, I think we segment out. Indeed, I feel that we're coming a little bit reductionist with SNPs. And she's very mindful to say these are not diagnostic, but they do sharpen the sword. I love how she said that. But I love the way she used buckets to say these ones have got to do with, you know, metabolism or neurotransmitters or cardiovascular issues or whatever.
Yes.
And then you can sort of see the grouping of the SNPs. And indeed, this is where I think the future lies. The groupings of the SNPs to give you a greater risk of something happening.
Yeah.
from a multi-pronged issue, like with your genes,
Yeah.
rather than being the controller of everything.
Yeah, I suppose when I was looking at how she was categorizing the SNPs and the influences on the various areas of someone's health, it kind of reminded me of, and I know we've had Alessandra Edwards and also I believe Brad McEwen talk about this on the podcast in the past, is about mind mapping out a person's consultation. Now, I'm sure that if we ask somebody who's maybe presently in college and in clinic, that this is a methodology that they're already being taught, this mind mapping kind of thing. But for people like you and I, whose qualification predates technology that enabled us to do that, that seems really new and crazy amazing to us, because, you know, it just wasn't part of how we did things. So I was kind of thinking about that, how she organized it into basically a flow chart. I mean, who doesn't love a flow chart? And put it into like, and then she gives it to the patient and she annotates it with, you know, these take home messages. And so I just loved kind of seeing how she worked her way through that kind of process, how she kind of got down into the nuts and bolts, and she figured out, you know, where there were areas that she had to focus on and where there weren't. And so it's really made me think, I really need to look into some of these mind mapping things to start to help to guide therapy. And also, I have to say, looking at the way she did that, it has helped me to understand how I might bring genetic reporting into like what you already learned as far as biochemistry and how you're already approaching things, like everything from, say, you know, if you've got a patient now, after listening to Amanda's session, you've got a patient now and you're throwing everything you can throw at them for, let's say, inflammation and dysbiosis, for example, they underlie a lot of things, but then you're trying to throw these things at them and you don't realize that they've got SNPs in pathways that are actually impacting your therapy. Like she was talking about the FOOT2 genes in her workshop session. And of course I piqued my interest because I have those genes. And so she was saying that, you know, she sees almost 90-something% of the time that if that gene is there, it almost influence that SNP. If that SNP is in her patient picture, that almost always impacts B12 status, but also is very indicative of dysbiotic state. So you know, you start to look into this gene, and you're like, suddenly, hang on a minute. If somebody's got that gene, like I have to address that, needs to be addressed, because without a good microbiome and a healthy gut environment, like we know, everything starts to unravel. So that was, I suppose, a really take-home message for me from that session.
You know, that too, but also it raised another question. We always think about how do we intercede, what is the best probiotic, and we always I feel this is a topic that we're getting shanghaied by evidence. And, you know, if you look at the evidence of helping the microbiota to diversify, there's good or reasonable evidence with LGG. But to treat dysbiosis, which in itself is a concept, it's not a disease, we haven't defined it. We don't know what dys means because we don't know what normal means. So how then do we intercede? And the two messages for me, one was, this is indeed why we should prefer plant-based foods to help feed Akkermansia.
Yes.
Now Akkermansia muciniphila. Now keto nutrition. Dom D'Agostino also said that keto nutrition can influence Akkermansia positively, which was really interesting. So I thought that fats would not do that, but anyway. So
it's to do with the protein pathways. So some of these
plant-based diet, But the other one is which probiotic, if we're going to help. And I don't think there's consensus on which one helps dysbiosis. So indeed, if you're going to give a probiotic, give a broad spectrum one, or give something that favors the bifidobacterium, you know, something. But I don't think we have a hero, and I don't believe in heroes, forgive me.
No, I agree.
have a suspicion,
I
about
agree.
patents.
I think it becomes hard to chase Alice down the rabbit hole of a single individual strain that's going to achieve some amazing feat when, we're a little bit more complex than that. We're thousands and thousands of bacteria, and also those bacteria require food and fuel, of which we consume very little, decent amounts anyway. And so, I agree that we still don't know enough.
And particularly when you think, okay, what also influences the microbiota? Restful sleep, good exercise,
hydration,
portion size, hydration, all of these simple naturopathic axioms. Treat the gut,
breathing, mouth breathing versus nasal breathing. Like, that's an emerging area that's going to influence our microbiome as well. Yes, we don't know enough, but we know a lot that we know that we don't know enough.
But this, again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. A good conference, a good symposium is where you come away with unanswered questions because something has tweaked your mind.
Yes.
So, look, I mean, there's so many aha moments that I got out of there, but as well, like I've written down here, there's so many questions I'm going, but hang on. And that takes some figuring out, I can't wait for Amanda's second weekend, I've got to say.
Yes, definitely. And so I don't know about you, but if I had to pick one thing that really drove home the session for me was that loneliness drives disease.
Yes. There is now a minister for loneliness in the UK.
Really?
Yes, there is. A minister for loneliness.
Yeah.
How sad is that we actually need a politician to guide us?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a danger signal.
And so very, very relevant for the times we're currently living through.
Yeah, sadly. On the converse of that, what I loved about Amanda, and do love about Amanda, is she's so much fun. She's so human. And she'll, a couple of times she said something, and then she went, don't take that out of context. like a comment about how love could spread a virus. And then she realised what she said, but don't take that out of context.
She fit in very well here when she was here last year for the 7th BioCeuticals Research Symposium. She definitely didn't have any issues with understanding our Australian wit and
No, indeed, she says the word arc, like if something is arcing up. Amping up. If something is amping up, something is increasing. The way that she says amp, I just fell in love with.
Okay.
It was awesome.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm not too sure how long we've been chatting for, but we probably need to wrap up. So on that note...
Oh, forgive me. Can I just make a call out?
Sure.
The first person in the chat to answer a question, and that is, what is the circle or the cycle that if you don't convert it properly causes increased lipid peroxides, especially the peroxynitrite? The first person to answer that one in the chat will send you out a free methylation poster from FX Medicine, wherever you are, okay? And you can have a look at these posters on fxmedicine.com.au/infographic. Have a look.
Yes.
But the first person wins one.
Oh, okay. Challenge thrown down there, everybody.
That's my call out, because that was a really interesting one. And again, I'd like to see some research. I wonder if there's any research combining that cycle with lipid risk, with cardiovascular risk.
I don't know. I don't know. Once again, walking away with more questions than answers sometimes.
We go.
All right, so we'll see you back here tomorrow. Up tomorrow, we of course have Lara Bryden, and she's going to be talking about ovulation matters, exploring the value of natural ovulatory menstrual cycles for general health, which she is an absolute expert at, and I can't wait to hear her workshop as well.
Absolutely, and she takes no prisoners.
And then,
I love listening to Lara, she's great. So Beck, thanks so much for taking us through Amanda Archibald's first plenary and first workshop today.
Yep, just one last thing though. Tomorrow afternoon, for those who are also interested in genetics, there will be a special session at midday with Dr. Mark Donohoe talking about the ApoE genes and their relationship, I'm guessing, to Alzheimer's disease. So if that's an area of interest, make sure you tune in and stay on after midday, because yeah, we get to pick Mark's brain for that one.
I mean, there's a flick there. I'm definitely going to listen because I still don't understand it. Even from last year, I still don't get it.
Yeah.
It's almost like disease.
Actually, he did a great interview on FX Omics with Dr. Saja. Oh my gosh, it's gone out of my brain. Anyway, I'll make sure I put a link for that in the chat perhaps.
Right.
And she was talking about ApoE genes, and I think that she explained it quite well. And so I came away from that feeling like I understood it better, but of course it's not sunk into my brain. I have all the genes that affect my cognitive function. Sorry about that, people.
I will go on to FX Omics on my car.
Yeah, FX Omics and Saja Beanstra-Hill. It's just dropped in my brain.
Thanks for that simple name. Great.
Yes. So, all right, we'll see you back.
Thank
you. We'll see you tomorrow.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook and Beck Guild.